Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Foley, and I'm the Chief Science Officer for the Focused Ultrasound Foundation. And I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of the foundation and also why we are really active in this space for advancing and defining the role of focused ultrasound in immuno-oncology and the activities that we're engaged in. So why are we interested in this area? So in the past several years, we've seen anecdotal evidence in clinical trials that focused ultrasound may be in fact inducing an immune response in patients with cancer. This is from a clinical trial that occurred in Italy several years ago. And here's a patient with pancreatic cancer. You can see a very large tumor here, pancreatic cancer primary tumor. But what was interesting in a handful of patients in this trial was that not only did the primary tumor decrease in size over time after focused ultrasound treatment, but also metastatic tumors decreased in size as evidenced here in these MR images. And so this, of course, was a phenomenon that was giving some indication that focused ultrasound was inducing an immune response. And so there's been a lot of work done preclinically and also clinically now to really try to understand what is focused ultrasound exactly doing to the immune response. And we still have a lot of questions that need to be answered. And that's what we're going to really tackle in this workshop coming up next week. And we're really excited for you all to join us and help us to kind of engage in discussions to answer the questions that remain for this field. So just in general, focused ultrasound really has a role to play in all four pillars of cancer treatment: surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, and immunotherapy, but we'll focus on the role in immunotherapy. And really, focused ultrasound can both enhance anti-tumor immune response or enhance the delivery of immunotherapy. And so we'll talk about, or I'll kind of briefly mention those different potential mechanisms here, but we'll get into much more discussion in other pre-recorded talks as well as in the workshop itself. So, as you all know, the field of cancer immunotherapy is really produced a lot of successes over the years. And there are many different immunotherapies that are out there now for patients with different tumor types. But despite their demonstrated benefits of tumor regression and increased survival, most of these immunotherapies are only effective in a small portion of patients, maybe 20 to 40% of patients. So there are limitations, obviously. One, that most patients are still not responders to immunotherapies. Maybe they have cold tumors, maybe it's something specific about that patient's tumor. Some respond, but then they relapse over time. And then others have a response, but the side effects and toxicities of the drugs are too much for them to stay on these drugs for a long period of time. And so they can't have a prolonged response. So where there are all these different limitations, there's potential opportunities for focused ultrasound. So very briefly, and again, other presenters will get into much more detail on this. Focused ultrasound, when it disrupts tumor cells, can expose antigens and release proteins, which then allow the immune system to recognize and attack tumors, both primary and metastatic. So that's what we've seen preclinically and are starting to see clinically. So what does that mean? Focused ultrasound could potentially stimulate an immune response, which perhaps could convert cold tumors into hot tumors, making more patients responders. It could augment the effectiveness of current immunotherapeutics, perhaps enabling a more robust and prolonged response to drugs, or decreasing the dose of drugs that are needed, which could reduce the side effects. And that also could be used, as I mentioned, to enhance the delivery of immunotherapeutics to the tumors. So, that's kind of in a nutshell what we think the role of focused ultrasound is, and why the foundation has been really active in this space now for the past several years to try to advance things. So just a little bit more about the foundation as an organization. So we are a medical research, education, and advocacy organization based in Charlottesville, Virginia, but have a global impact in terms of the organizations and the researchers that we work with and the researchers that we fund. We really have become the catalyst to accelerate the development and adoption of focused ultrasound for treating a wide variety of disorders. But as I'll mention a little later, we've keyed in on some where there's a huge unmet clinical need. So in general, we're really trying to influence the direction of the field of focused ultrasound research towards these, addressing these critical unmet needs. So we identify where we think the big unmet needs are that focused ultrasound could potentially address. We help set research priorities for the field, biomechanisms that we want to look into, such as cancer immunotherapy, clinical indications that may be, we think are important. We also try to change the culture to one that is more patient-centric, that operates with a sense of urgency, and that is all about collaboration. So we think collaboration is incredibly important for driving innovation. And so we want to get as many of our, researchers and other stakeholders in the community collaborating. And that is a big part of what we do. We try to, break down the silos of secrecy that exist between and within government, academia, industry, get people to be more comfortable sharing their experience, their information, and ideas. That's why workshops such as we'll hold next week are incredibly important, because that's really where we want that transferring and sharing of ideas to occur. We want folks to be, coordinating activities to avoid the duplication of effort, to really, again, try to stimulate innovation and more rapidly reach the results that we're driving for, which really is to accelerate the development and adoption of focused ultrasound as a standard of care. So we do a lot of different things, but what would be really probably most of interest to this community is we try to organize, conduct, and fund research. And so there we are funding primarily in areas of neurological disorders. Those could be Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, OCD, depression, cancer, and cancer immunotherapy. So of course, that's our focus for this workshop. And our big areas are, again, the areas of most unmet needs. So glioblastoma and pancreatic cancer are two that are incredibly important to us, and we fund a lot in those areas, but also areas like breast cancer, melanoma, others, and we'll discuss a lot of that again during the workshop. We've become the largest non-governmental funding source for focused ultrasound, and we definitely want to encourage all of you to talk to us either during the workshop or after about potential ideas that you have for proposals and projects that we could potentially fund in the cancer immunotherapy space. So again, because of our interest in what focused ultrasound can do when combined with cancer immunotherapy and the promise there, we started a dedicated cancer immunotherapy program back in 2015. And we have had a lot of activity since then. We've co-sponsored with CRI 4 workshops now, the 4th being the one that is about to take place. The first one was back in 2015, another in 2016, and then third in 2019. And, we've also established a scientific advisory board to help guide some of our work, as well as a growing working group of folks who are involved in the field. We've secured key partnerships, CRI being our primary partner from the very beginning, but also we've established partnerships with PICE, Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy, who you'll hear from as well, the Melanoma Research Alliance, Pancreatic Cancer UK, and also Quest Diagnostics and Q² Solutions. We'll talk a little bit more during the workshop about immune monitoring guidelines that we've helped develop and how we would like for these organizations, these labs, to essentially become a core lab for folks in the field, so that we can have more standardized analysis before and after focused ultrasound treatment of both blood and tissue samples. So as this, as our program evolved, we thought it was really important to establish a scientific advisory board with both members that were performing focused ultrasound research in cancer immunotherapy, as well as those who are more from the immunology side or the clinical side. And so we have a wide range here of kind of backgrounds and expertise. And I'm not going to read these, but you can see the list here, which is a really stellar group. And they've been great in terms of helping as we're, I'll talk about sort of the questions that are guiding our work and the projects that we fund. They've helped in refining those questions, helped as we've, connecting us to other researchers and that sort of thing. So this leads us to these questions, as I mentioned, that the Scientific Advisory Board has helped us define. We call them our burning questions, and we'll talk about these a lot in the workshop. We'll kind of show or discuss where we are with respect to each of these questions and have open discussions about what kind of projects we need to move forward and help us further address these questions. So, I'll just kind of read through these briefly, but again, we're going to go into this a lot more in the workshop. What are the comparative immune effects induced by different focused ultrasound modes? So, and how do these compare to other therapies like radiation, for instance? So focused ultrasound has many different modes of action. For those of you who are not aware, you're going to learn more about that in other pre-recorded talks and in the workshop. And, whether it's thermal, mechanical modes of focused ultrasound, they may induce different effects in terms of the immune response. And so those are things that we really need to better understand. How do these focused ultrasound immune effects vary by tumor type as well? What clinical disease targets are ideal for focused ultrasound and immunotherapy combinations? What are the optimal drugs to combine with focused ultrasound treatment and the optimal dosing and timing? And what metrics can be used to predict clinical success? And we'll talk a lot about that as well during the workshop. And can blood samples, for instance, in the absence of biopsies, reliably predict response? So we'll go into a lot more detail on these, and we can also refine these questions as we move through the workshop to try to direct us better in the future. So just a couple other things the foundation's been engaged in. Again, we're going to talk about these a lot more. We've developed some guidelines for immune analysis. We have preclinical guidelines and clinical guidelines that we developed in collaboration with our Scientific Advisory Board, as well as other members of the community. This was sort of came out of our last workshop that was in 2019. And we have really engaged Quest and Q² solutions about becoming a core lab, as I mentioned again, so we could have more standardized methodologies for this immune analysis. And we've set up a data repository where researchers will be able to store or essentially just put their data so that others can gain access to it as we're again moving forward with this kind of immune analysis. We, as I mentioned, are always funding projects in this space. So our current inventory of focused ultrasound funded projects includes 6 clinical trials and 11 preclinical projects in the cancer immunotherapy space. But over time, our all-time funding has been about 3.2 million in this space. And again, as I mentioned, we're always open to receiving new proposals. And some of these we also like to co-fund with other organizations, other foundations, be it CRI, be it PICE, be it some disease-specific foundation. So that's also something to consider as well as we're moving forward. And the types of projects, and these are just kind of the different flavors of projects that are typically going on right now in the field, both ones that we fund and others that we're not funding. There are those that are, focused ultrasound plus immunotherapeutic clinical trials. And these are, of course, really exciting kind of first in the world trials. So the first one of these that has been occurring at UVA is focused ultrasound plus pembrolizumab for treating metastatic breast cancer. And you'll hear more about that study during this workshop. There's also a similar study that's getting started using focused ultrasound with atezolizumab for treating advanced solid tumors. And I think you'll hear about that one as well. And then there's a study occurring in France which hopefully we can talk about in our discussion, which is using the blood-brain barrier opening mechanism of focused ultrasound to help enhance the delivery of checkpoint inhibitors into the brain to treat melanoma brain metastasis. So those are kind of the types of trials that are occurring out there right now in terms of focused ultrasound plus immunotherapeutics. There are also various clinical trials where the primary goal is not about inducing an immune response. It's about simply ablating the tumor to treat various cancers with focused ultrasound, but perhaps an immune response would be generated, kind of like that study I showed at the start of the talk in pancreatic cancer. And so what we're doing here is we're encouraging researchers to add on immune assessment before and after the focused ultrasound ablation to really try to capture that immune response that is being generated. So we have several of these trials occurring all over the US, and the foundation is helping to support some of them. They're in pancreatic cancer. We have trials at Stanford and Oxford, and I think others are coming up as well. Prostate cancer, we have a trial in France. And then also with liver cancer, there's, and you should hear about this as well in the workshop. There's trials using histotripsy, which is a mechanical ablation form of focused ultrasound. And so that's a little bit of a different flavor, and you'll hear about that. And then finally, in the preclinical models, that's where we're really doing a lot to try to understand the comparative immune effects induced by different focused ultrasound modes. And so we're funding a lot in this area. Several different sites working in glioblastoma, breast cancer, for instance, at UVA, pancreatic cancer and melanoma also at multiple sites. And so these are the types of projects that we tend to support. But again, we're open to learning about other projects as well. And then this is just an example, which is probably not an exhaustive list right now, of the global research sites that are involved in this space. And so I think that's all right now for an introduction. And I think, you're going to be in these other pre-recorded talks learning a lot more about the state of the field for focused ultrasound in immuno-oncology. And I look forward to really great discussions during the workshop on September 1st and 2nd. Thank you.